Hello, this is Connie Barlow. I'm the founder of Torreya Guardians, and that's a group of volunteer citizens naturalists who have been since about 2005 working to save the Torreya taxifolia, the most endangered conifer in the world. It's a member of Taxaceae, the yew family, and I'll show you, actually I can show you an example right now. I've got it right here. All right, look at this. This is a branchlet of Torreya. It's a conifer, it's an evergreen. Looks kind of like a yew, doesn't it, or a hemlock, but it has very, very prickly leaves on it. Here's also an example of its seed. It's a conifer, so technically this is a female cone, but it looks more like a fig, doesn't it? I'll be talking about this in a moment. Anyway, since about 2004, 2005, this group has been active, strictly in a volunteer way, we've got no funding, in trying to help the most endangered conifer species in the world, Torreya taxifolia, whose historically native range seems to be just northern, a little bit of northern Florida, along the east shore of the Apalachicola River, and a little bit up into Georgia along that same watershed system. And it's been endangered for, since the Endangered Species Act was passed, actually, because it stopped reproducing there in the 1960s. And of course, it's received a lot of official attention from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and scientists working under the auspices of the official Endangered Species Act. But it hasn't been making any progress in its native range. They've done a lot of great work in trying to bring it back into being able to seed, but haven't been successful. So you may ask, how do I have this seed here now? How is this possible if it hasn't reproduced since about 10 years after I was born? It stopped reproducing. How do I have this seed now? And why is it legal for me to have this seed? And what has my group, our group, Torreya Guardians, been doing with this seed? And why did we feel it necessary to go around the official Endangered Species Act in order to do what we felt was necessary for helping this endangered species? I'm going to try to deal with that all here, just because there's so much going on, and I just got off a major trip of both collecting seeds, planting seeds, and recruiting more people to plant seeds legally, all legally, up in North Carolina, even though this plant is historically native to Florida. So let's get started on what that's all about. Today is November 5th, 2013, and my husband and I, Michael Dow, just arrived here in Springfield, Missouri yesterday afternoon. And I really wanted to get this recorded because there's so much going on, and if I wait and I try to write it down, I have to get into a linear flow, and as a science writer, I feel I have to get everything right. But as a YouTuber, on my Ghosts of Evolution channel, I can give you a lot of pictures here and just talk to you about what our group is doing now and the significance of what's just happened over this past month. Let me just mention that today, November 5th, a couple of things significant. I went on to the New York Times online for the first time in many days. We've been so busy working on this plan, and Michael with his speaking engagements, and me too, over in North Carolina and South Carolina. But today I went on and I saw this on the New York Times. United Nations group warns on emissions. This is amazing. I mean, this is today, finally. A group is talking about the carbon budget, which the IPCC in its new September report this year just had in a little paragraph talking about what the budget is. That is that only about one-third of the proven reserves of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, can be allowed to come out of the earth without going above 2 degrees C in ultimate climate global warming, owing to all the CO2 that the burning of fossil fuels puts into the atmosphere. And so doing a YouTube today feels really significant, similar to what I felt last May, doing a YouTube video introduction just a few days after it was recorded 400 parts per million of CO2 for the first time up in Hawaii over the clear atmosphere there. 400 parts per million. We humans had just finished adding to the atmosphere. Very significant times we live in. The other thing is that there was a lead article in the Science Times section of the New York Times written by Dennis Overby, great science writer. I actually met him maybe 20 years ago when I lived in Manhattan, New York City. And the title is Far Off Planets Like the Earth Dot the Galaxy. Kepler telescope finally figuring out from all the data collected how many Earth-like habitable planets are probably out there in our own Milky Way. And I like to just mention this because while we're dealing with the fright of what we humans are doing to this Earth, not just the biodiversity extinctions we've known about since the late 1970s, the biodiversity crisis, but what we're doing to the climate. I mean, Thomas Berry talked about us humans as being a geological force. We are a geological force. And he died about 4 years ago, and I never really understood it at that time, but I do now. Anything that can change the climate at the pace we're changing it is a geological force. That's why scientists call that we've entered the Anthropocene, a geological time period like the Holocene, the Pleistocene before that was the Ice Ages, but the Anthropocene for what we're doing to Earth. So what I'm going to be talking about here, what Torreya Guardians, myself included, have been doing with the most endangered conifer in the world, is another aspect of why this truly is the Anthropocene. Because we humans are now, and increasingly, going to be called into following our tracks, covering our tracks, by helping plants and animals adapt to climate change by moving north or up mountains or around civilization in ways faster than they can do on their own. In the past, squirrels and other dispersers have been able to help this plant, Torreya taxifolia. They've been able to help this conifer move north and south and north and south over the Pleistocene ice ages. Every time that the ice ages came down from Canada all the way down into New York State, this had to move to the south, down into Florida. And every time the interglacials have come in the past, presumably, this has also moved north. It's just happening now at a much faster pace than squirrels can disperse this seed. So that's what I'll be talking about. Anyway, I like to mention the Dennis Overby article, Far Off Planets Like the Earth Dot the Galaxy, because whenever I get into a sense of despair over what my generation and others alive today are doing to the Earth because of our extravagant living, not because we're evil people, but just because this is what the fossil fuel era has brought us to, and what that means for the generations to come and all the other creatures out there, I can fall into despair about that. And so I need to have a way that I can be in action. That's what Torreya gives me, a way to be in action. And also I have a need to feel about, even if the worst case scenario happens and we humans really make the planet inhospitable for the charismatic plants and complex animals around today, not only will Earth be able to heal itself over millions of years after we're gone, just like Earth has been able to do after meteor impacts, such as the meteor impact that killed off the dinosaur. I mean, that's really important, this deep time perspective, to give me hope, even when I'm dealing with the despair about our human-caused global changes for climate on planet Earth. It's also helpful to know that there's probably a lot of other Earth-like planets out there in our own galaxy, and that life is also out there as well. So with that deep time, a large time scale and really huge spatial scale of our galaxy, let's take a look at the specifics of what's going on with our group, Torreya Guardians, now for adapting, needy plants in this time of rapid climate change, and how it's possible for us to be doing this as volunteers. Okay, starting off, let me mention that the reason I'm doing this now and haven't been doing it in past years is that there's been some controversy about whether it is legal for citizens to take seeds from endangered plants. That, again, not from where they are historically still found, but from botanical gardens, other private growers that had them growing out of state, even before the Endangered Species Act was passed. Why it's legal for us to do this, when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service itself, in charge of this endangered species, still hasn't decided whether it's willing to engage in what we call assisted migration. That is, helping this plant survive not by trying to pamper it and cage it and fertilize it and do all these things in its historically native range in northern Florida, but actually move it into a climate regime where it has a better chance of surviving without all this extra human help going on. Well, what happened this month, in fact, in the September-October 2013 issue of the journal Conservation Letters, is that there was a 16-page report published by Patrick D. Shirey, S-H-I-R-E-Y, Patrick D. Shirey, and about 5 or 6 co-authors. And the title of it is Commercial Trade of Federally Listed Threatened and Endangered Plants in the United States. And basically what this does is finally say that what we have been doing in not touching any of the plants that remain in the official critical habitat, historically native range in northern Florida, but actually taking it from botanical gardens and private landowners that planted it 80 to 100 years ago, especially in North Carolina, taking it from there, taking the seeds from there, taking some cuttings from there, and experimenting with moving them around into actually natural forest. That is, to see if this plant can survive, not just protected and guarded and nurtured by us, but right back out into the wild forest, where frankly, it's been for tens of millions of years. This particular species, Torreya taxifolia, has been around, the genus has been around since the long-necked dinosaurs, the Jurassic. I'll talk about that a little bit longer. But climate has changed enormously during that time, and so we know that it's been moving north and south for millions and millions of years at the slow pace of climate change. So from a deep time perspective, which is my specialty, paleoecology, evolutionary ecology, I've written 4 books in that realm, my most recent, Ghosts of Evolution. From a deep time perspective, this plant has not spent a great deal of its time in Florida. Really, it's been in the southern Appalachians and probably a great deal north. So anyway, this paper by Patrick Shirey, let me read a couple excerpts from it that I've got on my screen here. A listed plant could be purchased in one state and then transported to another state without violating the Endangered Species Act, so long as the plant was taken from and planted on property not under federal jurisdiction, such as private property. Furthermore, the Endangered Species Act does not prohibit an individual from giving listed plants as a gift to someone in another state, so long as a change in plant ownership is not in the pursuit of gain or profit. And basically, that's what we've been doing all along. We in Torreya Guardians, we all make our living doing other things. There's only one of us that's, I think, retired. Russ Regnery is a retired microbiologist. But I'm a science writer and a speaker on evolution. That's how I earn my living on the road with my husband, speaking mostly in churches. Jack Johnston is an emergency room nurse. That's how he earns his living. Lee Barnes is a land assessor and helping landowners in the Waynesville, North Carolina area evaluate their lands, figure out where to drill wells, how to deal with their forests. Zev Friedman, he's I think our youngest Torreya Guardian. He's a permaculture guy who works with land owners in the Asheville area, particularly taking Torreya taxifolia seeds. And landowners who've lost a lot of hemlocks, those of you who know the eastern United States, an exotic disease in their woolly adelgid, wiping out all the hemlocks from the Smoky Mountain regions. So landowners who are mourning the loss of hemlocks, we're hoping that this Torreya taxifolia can come in and pretty much assume the same ecological niche as the hemlocks, including growing very big. I'm going to put in a picture here now of, oh gosh, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I took a trip to Michael and I were speaking in California, and I took some side trips there to go and visit the sister species of our Torreya taxifolia. This is the western United States, western North America species of genus Torreya. It looks very similar to it. It's the California Torreya. And I went to see what kind of habitats is it living in so that I could assess where we should put the Florida Torreya. I mean, right now the Florida Torreya is just stuck down in Florida. But all the other 4 or 5 Torreya species in the world, that is East Asia, there's 3 or 4 species there, the California Torreya, all of those are mountain species. Mountain species, but where in the mountains? What are their associated plants? What kind of sunshine versus shade regime do they do? How do they do in fire? All these things I went to look at in California. And you can go on our website, torreyaguardians.org, click on California, and you can see photo essays of that. And I also invite other landowners there to send me pictures, or just people who live in California who've stumbled upon this species, so that I can get as many pictures up there as possible. We need to be able to see these pictures so that us working with the eastern species of Torreya can figure out what's the best habitat here. But I'm going to throw in a picture of me visiting the world champion California Torreya tree down north of Santa Cruz. And also I've seen pictures of the Korean species of Torreya, and they get enormous. Canopy trees, huge, enormous. Take a look at the size of this one. Okay, that's me with the world champion Torreya californica tree. So even though when European botanists finally got to the panhandle of Florida along the east shore of the Apalachicola River, the only place where this species really was growing at the time, even though they were there no more than 60 feet tall or so, and maybe 2 feet in diameter, I think they can get a lot bigger. Why not? Why not? So anyway, if they can, wouldn't it be wonderful if 300 years from now, some of the Torreya seeds that those of us alive today are planting are able to take the place of the hemlocks, serve that same kind of conifer shading of cool rivers in the late fall, early spring, before all the deciduous canopy comes out. Anyway, this is our hopes. So let me get on to, first of all, just a little background as to why we felt it not only necessary, but deeply appropriate for us to work with moving Torreya taxifolia north. That is, finding seeds still growing in private gardens in North Carolina, harvesting the seeds, and then spreading them into other areas in North Carolina and even points north, trying to what we call rewild the tree, give it a chance to show us that it's perfectly capable of surviving on its own once we get it reestablished in the mountains of the southern Appalachians. The reason we felt we could do this is because this species has been called the poster plant for climate change. That is, it's very likely that already in the 1960s or 1950s, when this species started to die out in its native range in Florida, not because there was any exotic disease, no woolly adelgid, no Dutch elm disease from Europe, no Asian chestnut disease coming in that wiped out the American chestnut, no emerald green ash borer that's taking out the ash trees now all over North Carolina. I already saw that in Michigan. They're all gone. And I was just up in eastern Canada. No scale insect taking out the American beech tree at the northernmost part of its range, taking out the American beech tree now. What was going on was not an exotic that has been destroying the American deciduous forest and conifer trees within it. This was simply a number of diseases, pathogens, viruses, fungi that are normally there in the panhandle of Florida. But our hypothesis is that it started to not be able to reproduce there, basically like elm and chestnut, growing up to sapling stage, maybe 10 feet, and then dying back, and then coming back from the roots and dying back and so forth. It was simply because it was challenged by climate change. That the climate by the 1950s and 60s had already risen enough to really disturb this plant. And even if Phytophthora was brought in, there's a lot of plants that can survive it if they're in a cool enough environment. So by moving this north, we think we can help this species. Now, we think it's already been moving north and south for previous times in the Pleistocene ice ages, but that for one reason or another, it lost its seed disperser, or humans got in the way, or too much fire happening. Quite frankly, I think that the Native Americans living along the Apalachicola River long before Europeans came here, it was such a wonderful river area to live along, and yet this tree was so confined to that area. It's now known to be a peak glacial refuge. This is where all the trees of the southern Appalachians went down to in the peak glacial reserves and waited out there while there was ice in New York State and spruce trees in boreal spruce trees in South Carolina. Everything else, our beeches, our sweet gums, our tulip trees, our dogwoods, our Torreya, everything else had to hang out down in the Apalachicola and probably along the Altamaha River peak glacial refuge as well. So we think that probably Native Americans had simply extirpated the squirrels in their village areas right along the Apalachicola River. This is normal for all humans to do that. They didn't extinguish anything. The little kids went out, and part of their job was to harvest all the small rodents. And so the squirrels were gone, and so these seeds could not move north. And frankly now, they cannot move north. Take a look at a map sometime. What you'll see the Apalachicola River turns into, just north of the border, is a couple of reservoirs. It's lost its capacity to move north, so we have to do it now. So this is a poster plant for climate change because it's already experiencing problems in its native habitat. It's also a poster plant because, quite frankly, this is not going to kudzu. Take a look at this seed. This is not bird dispersed, wind dispersed. This is squirrel dispersed. There's a single seed in here. And so it's not going to turn into a kudzu. We don't have to worry about it becoming an invasive species. Now, there are people who call it exotics in North Carolina, but from a deep time perspective, this is the return of a native. And so those in the know, the scientists who are aware of this species and have really looked at it, do not cause the alarm that this is going to turn into a kudzu. So this is the first plant that really needs to be moved north. Now we're doing it. Now what Patrick Shirey has done in his October paper that was just published, a couple things. Let me move back to the page, because one of the things that he says in here is that finally, under U.S. federal law, citizens who move a listed plant are not constrained by the same assessment process as the federal government. Their actions are legal under the ESA without a review of their plans. Now let's take that in for a minute. I don't know what this is going to mean, but what we've been able to do, just move ahead with no money, a lot of responsibility on our part. I'm going to talk about the various expertise that each of us contributes to this group. We haven't had to do public hearings. We haven't had to go through any great process. We've right now been experimenting with how well does Torreya taxifolia do in different environments in North Carolina, moving it even as far north as Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, Ohio, it's already been surviving a couple winters there with no help, just outdoors. You know, nothing to help it during the coldest of times. We're watching as to whether it does better in a beech forest. We've determined that a hickory canopy is probably too dry for it. We're just learning many, many things about this plant. And yet, the official U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service research program, and scientists are operating under that, under the terms of the Endangered Species Management Plan for this plant, cannot go ahead and do what we have done. That's what Patrick Shirey and his co-authors are saying. It's a lot more rigorous process for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do this. I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't know how it should play out. But I think the call that he's raised is very important. So on October 31st, 2013, this was just, 5 days ago, Michael Dowd and I, my husband Michael Dowd and I, got a chance to actually visit the Torreya taxifolia tree that's remaining in Clinton, North Carolina. Now, the reason we know about it is because of an avocational horticulturalist in North Carolina, North Carolina native there, A.J. Bullard. In fact, let me show a picture of A.J. here. I finally got a chance to meet him. In 2009, I talked to him on the phone, but here's a picture of A.J. This was published in North Carolina Wildlife Magazine sometime this year. And the title of this article, AJ just gave me a copy of this while I was visiting him here, is Botanizing with Bullard. With no formal horticultural training, retired dentist A.J. Bullard has earned a niche as one of the state's preeminent botanists. I mean, he's an amazing guy. Now, back in 1998, he and a cousin of his had collected some seeds from the tree in Clinton, North Carolina, and I'm not sure how he found out about it. I mean, he may have discovered it or word of mouth. But it's on the property of Mrs. Kennedy on College Street in Clinton, North Carolina. And my husband found her in the white pages, so I gave her a call, and she said, yeah, come over and collect any seeds you want, and also any seedlings that you see growing underneath it. And so that's what we did. First picture I'm showing you here is the tree itself. It's in the foreground. It's the green conifer in the foreground. You can see the main stem it has, and as with Torreya species all over the world, there are two other smaller stems coming right out of the base. Those would have begun as what's called basal sprouts. This is normal for the species. Here's a close-up of the main stem and the two basal sprouts. And you can see there's even some small ones that are coming out. It's a remarkable way for the tree to be able to actually not die if something terrible happens to its main stem. That is, let's say it gets pushed over by a falling tree, which actually happened in a hurricane in 1998. There was one other Torreya on his property that A.J. Bullard told me about, and a big pine, longleaf pine, came down on it and took it out. And then the whole area was mowed over. But these basal sprouts here will come back up, and so very much like ginkgo tree, the tree can be, and sequoia and redwoods as well, the tree can be a lot, the genotype of the tree, that is genetically the individual coming back from the roots, can be a lot older than what it looks like on above ground. So anyway, there's one tree left. You can see our van behind there. You can see College Road out there as well. Let's move on to the next photograph here. And oh yeah, here's where you can see we walked up quite a ways. Mrs. Kennedy's house is quite a ways off the main road. And here's a chestnut oak standing in front of her house, and we're looking back towards the trees, and there's a man you see in the left. That's my husband Michael Dowd by the Torreya taxifolia. Now, going back to that original photo, the tree you see on the far left with the yellow leaves at its base, those are basal sprouts coming up from an American linden or basswood tree. That's a deciduous tree. The big trunk to the left of that, or rather to the right of it, just to the right of the blue car you see there, is a southern magnolia. Now this is an evergreen magnolia, and this may have been very helpful to the tree, the Torreya tree, when it was germinating as a seedling or a young tree during a drought, because that evergreen magnolia is on the south-facing side. So during the heat of summer, the droughts of summer, it would have been shaded, it would have been protected. But it also means that it's not getting as much sun to be able to produce prolifically. In fact, I don't think there's any fruits, that is female cones, growing on that south-facing side of Torreya. I wasn't able to see any. Now to the right, over by the van, you see a big deciduous tree. That's another chestnut oak. And look at the leaf fall you can see there. Chestnut oak, evergreen magnolia there, linden tree. In fact, there's so much shade in that area. There's no grass growing there. It doesn't have to be mowed. Whereas where I'm standing out on the lawn, that area is mowed. So continuing on through, take a look here. This is my husband, Michael Dowd, using a walking stick on the north-facing side of the Torreya tree. This is the only side we saw producing female fruit. He's knocking them down. Here are some pictures you can see of the Torreya taxifolia fruit on the tree. This is again October 31st, and this is exactly the right time you want to be there. It looked to me like about half of them had already fallen and half were still remaining on the tree. They will be falling off certainly in the next couple of weeks. When they get ripe, they have kind of an orangish purple color, as you can see here. They're often in pairs near the ends of the branchlets. Now, a couple more photographs here I'm going to show you of when I just looked down underneath this fruit-bearing side of the Torreya tree, the side that, even though it's north-facing, it's got more sunlight that actually reaches it. It's not blocked by the chestnut oak, and it's not blocked by the linden, and it's not blocked by the southern magnolia. It's just grassy lawn out where I'm standing. But when I look down, here you can see on the sphagnum moss, which again is an indicator of how shady this area is, you can see two of the fruit, kind of purplish in color. You can see a leaf of a chestnut oak, and you can see some brown of the husks removed from the fallen Torreya seeds, presumably by squirrels. Let's take another look to another picture here from another place. Here you can see three whole Torreya fruits that the squirrels have not harvested. Again, this is just what I found looking on the ground. And you can very easily see some freshly harvested where it's pulled the husks off and the seeds are what remains. So in fact, at this moment here, let me show you, I haven't done anything to these seeds here, okay? Look at how on their own they start to split. These seeds were harvested the first week in October, not ripe. I've had them mostly in the refrigerator. Haven't touched them, and look at how they're starting to split. Okay, I gotta move them over this way. Take a look how easy it is for me to remove that, that husk here. Okay, right there. See that? Isn't that amazing? Okay, that's what the squirrels so easily remove. And then they go and bury it. They bury some right beneath the tree, but mostly they'll be going off and burying them elsewhere. It's important for me to mention at this point that one of the insights I had during these last 2 weeks was that, and again, this is by going out and actually seeing the situation, that under normal circumstances, if Torreya, which is growing in the wild forest as it has for millions and millions of years, squirrels would be its friend, especially during a time of climate change. Squirrels would be the species that would be moving it north when the climate warms and moving it south when the glaciers come again. And squirrels can do that when you have long enough time period. Possibly passenger pigeons used to do that during previous interglacials. I mean, they're known to take beech nuts and acorns and so forth, and they can travel very long distances, possibly blue jays too. But right now, there's no doubt it's squirrels that have been doing it. So ultimately, squirrels are the friend of this species. They are the main disperser. We can count on squirrels. But right now, because we humans are changing climate so quickly, and because this tree is endangered, it's not reproducing at all in its native range. It's only reproducing frankly, in North Carolina right now. Trees that were planted 80, 100 years ago. It's the only place it's reproducing. Right now, squirrels are an enemy, and that is because we don't have enough seeds being reproduced. We need to take every seed reproduced, and we ourselves as humans need to bury it and keep it away from squirrels. So let's take a look, continue on here. All right, so there you can see the seeds on the fallen floor. So there was only one area that I was actually able to reach up, and it wasn't the fruit-producing side, it was a shady side. And I was able to see that on this tree were the male cones. The male cones occur in a lateral kind of way. These are just here, and they will be putting out pollen next May. This means that this tree, when stressed, is able to, if it's a male tree, it can produce some female fruit. If it's a female tree, it can produce some male cones. And so this is pretty much proof positive confirmation that this tree that was producing female cones was also able to produce male. So let's take a look at what the squirrels have been doing here. I'd like to show you a couple pictures of, look at these seedlings growing. Right here you can see a combination of, I didn't adjust this picture at all, a combination of leaves that have fallen from the chestnut oak and some of the old evergreen leaves from the southern magnolia. Those are the ones with just the smooth edges. The chestnut oak has a kind of wavy edges to it. And look in this picture, you can see the little seedling coming up of Torreya. There's a southern magnolia seed pod there with a red seed still extending from it. Here's a couple other pictures I took of seedlings. And Mrs. Kennedy gave me authorization to dig up some, so I ended up digging up 6 seedlings, and I'll show you what I did with that. Okay, that's it for the Clinton trees in terms of Clinton, North Carolina. Let's move on to where, half hour from then, northeast of Clinton, I went to Mount Olive, North Carolina, which is the home of A.J. Bullard. And I had interviewed him in 2009 and realized how much knowledge he has. But he mentioned that he had collected some seeds from the Clinton tree in 1998, planted them on his own land. And not only are they thriving now, they're reproducing. So let's take a look at some pictures from the land of A.J. Bullard in Mount Olive, North Carolina. Okay, so this is A.J. Bullard standing before one of his 2 Torreya taxifolia. He only has 2. He's collected seed and distributed them widely over the last couple of decades in order to help the species keep going. He's standing behind or in front of one that actually had very few female fruit on it. You see a kind of a shrubby looking conifer to the right of him here and to the far right of the picture. And that's the one that had both male cones on it and female fruit, both fallen and still there. And let me just mention where I'm standing is on his lawn. His house is behind me, and there is a giant Darlington oak, also known as a laurel oak, that he himself had planted in 1967. And so this is an oak that's on the actual south-facing side. But look at how amazing the growth form is here. These branches come all the way to the ground. This is maintained as lawn around here. So obviously it gets a lot of sun. This picture here is, he always labels his trees. He works with mulberry and a lot of other trees as well. He's just an amazing horticulturalist and botanist, self-taught. This is Torreya taxifolia. He's engraved on this piece of aluminum siding here. And he has Clinton, North Carolina, because obviously this tree is in Mount Olive, North Carolina. But what you put on a sign like this is the provenance. That is, where did the mother come from? Where was the seed harvested? And so this is a really important way to keep track of the genotypes. Because when you're dealing with an endangered species, one of the really crucial things is to make sure that we can maximize the genetic diversity. We don't want to lose that. It tends to be crushed off quite a bit. We don't have as much to work with when we're down to a few individuals. So knowing who the parent was is really helpful for being able, wherever we plant the trees, to try to bring in as much diversity as we can. So moving on to the next picture, here's several pictures of the Torreya taxifolia fruit hanging from the tree. Take a look, it's really purplish here. Many of them have already fallen to the ground. This is the perfect time to harvest them, fully ripe. And you can see some of them are actually starting to crack the fleshy outer area off them, even before they fall. Here's a picture of AJ himself with his white sweatshirt standing right behind the seeds so that you can see their size in comparison to his hand. Here's another picture where you can see the agricultural fields off from this tree. Again, this is the squat tree that was off to the right of AJ in that first picture. Take a look at the agricultural fields here. What's significant about seeing the surroundings is that these trees are precious for being able to reproduce seeds, but they are not part of rewilding this plant. It's not part of giving this plant an opportunity to show us what it can do. Squirrels cannot carry the seed far enough to get into wild forest. It simply won't be able to propagate itself using squirrels beyond this point. It's a great place as an orchard for helping these species survive, as are botanical gardens and arboretums. But it's only when you put the seeds into wild forest and give it a chance to move on its own that over the decades and centuries to come will have given Torreya taxifolia in the southern Appalachians an opportunity to show us what it really can do. What was also significant for me is that even though A.J. Bullard said there are 2 or 3 fox squirrels on his property, I saw no evidence, none at all, of squirrels having harvested the seeds. Now, obviously, given how prickly Torreya taxifolia is and how the seeds are actually produced out on towards the ends here, the squirrels can't harvest them until they fall. But I know Jack Johnston has squirrels who will basically, as soon as anything falls on his property or if he's dug up anything, they will go and try to harvest it. And this is very tasty for squirrels. So what's interesting here is there are no squirrels that have harvested this at all. I was able to harvest some of the seeds. AJ was keeping quite a few for himself, but he allowed me to gather 41 seeds. So again, very significant to actually go and visit and see the interactions of squirrels and the ripening of these seeds in their native habitat, or at least where they're capable of growing on their own. AJ mentioned that he does not water these trees even when he put them in as seeds or seedlings. He hasn't watered them at all. They get enough water in Mount Olive, North Carolina. So moving up here, another hugely significant thing that in fact AJ himself hadn't thought to look for, but I knew was that we needed to document, and he helped me do it. On this same shrubby individual of Torreya taxifolia, we were able to find not only the female fruit like this, but we were able to find, see if I can show it here, we were able to find the male, look at that, those are the male cones. So you'll see AJ here holding the male cones and the female cones. The female cones are, in this picture, they're at the top of the picture. See how large and angular they are. Again, they're not going to develop until next spring. The same with the male cones right below it. The male cones always have more of them laterally along near the end of the branchlet. The female cone is right at the end of the branchlets. There's usually 2 or 3, or even as you see here, 4 of them, but not much more. And then below that, take a look below that. You can see, what is that, 2, maybe 3. These are the vegetative buds. This is what next year, next spring, is going to flesh out into new branchlets. So right here we have the vegetative buds. We've got, up from that, we've got the male cones, and then we've got the female cones. This is proof positive that this is a species that, even though it's largely female trees and male trees, it can also produce either one of the sexual types on the same individual. That's a great hedge against extinction if your population gets very low. So one other photograph I really had to take to prove that this shrubby individual was not just several individual trees that happened to be growing close together, a female and a male. I needed to show this was a single tree. So I got down under this tree and took a couple photographs right at base level. And you can see that this is a single stem coming up from this tree. So that's it for my 2 experiences of seed collecting from the 2013 production of Seeds Naturally. Sharon Herman and I think Mark Schwartz at Tall Timbers Research came out and verified the identification of the Clinton tree as a Torreya taxifolia. So here again, here's the interaction of a citizen naturalist, not a trained botanist, and then the trained botanist coming out and verifying the identification. So let's move on to the second half of what made these last several weeks for me very significant. And that is, I not only was able to harvest some seeds from freestanding Torreya taxifolia mature trees in North Carolina, but I was then able to take those seeds and plant them. So let's take a look at some photographs from that. So the main property that I work with, the main private landowners who have a wild reforested landscape in the southern Appalachians, this is just under 3,000 foot elevation, is Sarah Evans. She and her husband, Chuck Dayton, live on a mountainside west of Waynesville, North Carolina. And in 2008, she received 21 trees from us, where the Torreya Guardians, we came in and we planted 21 seedlings that we had legally obtained from a nursery in South Carolina. Nurseries are not allowed to sell in interstate commerce. But if you go, as Patrick Shirey has mentioned in his paper, if you actually drive there, purchase them there, and then drive them wherever you want, so long as you don't sell them, it's perfectly fine to take them across a state border. You just can't engage in interstate commerce. So in 2008, we planted 21 seedlings there, and here's a couple pictures of that property when we first planted them. We also named them. Of the 21 seedlings we put into the Sarah Evans property. This one is named for David Brower, and here is Jack Johnston and Russ Regnery with this one in July 2008 when we planted the seedling. Here's a picture of me in Cornel Bryan Native Garden in Junaluska. That was our other site we planted in July 2008. We planted 10 seedlings there. And I am with the Aldo Leopold seedling, which is doing very well right now. Now here's Sarah Evans. You can see the yellow flag there up in the very left corner. To the left of it is a seedling of the Torreya taxifolia conifer, and this is in the fall of 2008. I went back there and took some pictures after the deciduous leaves have fallen. This is a very wet east-facing slope. Here's a picture of Lee Barnes with the Torreya seedling that has to bear a lot of sun in the summer. We call it Johnny Appleseed, and it's one of the few on the dry eastern side of the property that has a hickory canopy that's still doing very well. Rather over by this waterfalls here, Um, there's a summertime, it's just incredibly shady with a lot of tulip tree, beech tree, white oak. There's trillium around, hydrangea, a lot of ferns. It's just a very moist forest environment. Here's Chuck Dayton standing by a little tree here on the Evans property. He's the husband of Sarah Evans. And I want to show you this because take a look at the tree to his left, okay? Now, look at the same tree that was taken 4 months earlier. This is Russ Regnery standing over the same tree. We call it Thomas Berry. And that is the same stem there of another trunk to the left. Look at all the green, deciduous, lush growth around there, all right? I'll show you again the same tree with Chuck Dayton by it, Thomas Berry tree, which is still doing very well. One hypothesis is that since this is a conifer tree, it can keep active even during the winter in terms of photosynthetic sap running, especially when it doesn't get too cold. And it may do a lot of its photosynthesizing in the late fall and early spring when the deciduous canopy is gone. Okay, so the interesting thing about, I've planted seeds before. I am not one of the horticulturalists here. I'm more of the paleoecological understanding. I'm the one who's a science writer. I've done a lot of work in evolutionary ecology, and it was my idea with my great mentor, Paul S. Martin. We co-wrote a paper published in Wild Earth in the winter issue of 2004-2005 called Bring Torreya Taxifolia North Now. And this is where we present all the evolutionary ecology, the deep time perspective of why where Torreya is found now, its historically native range in northern Florida, is one of America's prime peak glacial refuges, that is, peak ice age glacial refuges. This is where everything was hanging out when there was ice in New York State. And so that's my expertise of thinking that Torreya taxifolia really needed to come north. I am not a horticulturalist. I love plants, but there are other Torreya Guardians who really know how to propagate them. Lee Barnes is one. Jack Johnston is incredible with this, as is Jeff Morris, who I just met this last time in Spencer, North Carolina. But planting the seeds, what I've been trying to do, while others have been germinating them right on their grounds in pots, and then we plant them out in the forest, I've wanted to see, can you put a seed directly right into the forest? Pretend you're a squirrel, and you put it right into a forest, like I just showed you a picture there of Sarah Evans' place. And can it germinate? Can it establish? Can it grow? Will it eventually be able to mature and reproduce on its own? That's called rewilding. That's letting the plant be able to do its own thing. And so this is the first year where I really tried to do it in a way that the squirrels weren't going to just take everything because it's such a tasty seed for them. So here are the techniques that I tried for being able to outsmart the squirrels. Let's take a look at the photographs I took of when I planted seeds. The first thing I tried to do was find fallen logs. Here you can see my hiking boot on the log, and I had just planted a Torreya taxifolia seed directly under that log, right where you see that little stick crossing it. And if you notice, I have then shoved a bunch of branches along the side, trying to guard it so that a squirrel can't come up to the side of it and then try to dig underneath it. I don't know whether a squirrel would actually be able to smell it under there. Now, a problem with putting it under a log, of course, is that there may be voles under there. You can feel vole tunnels sometimes, and of course, voles will also find it to be like, oh, you can eat it for a week, one seed of Torreya taxifolia, and it survived very well. So we'll see how that goes. I also tried in other areas to just take a whole bunch of sticks, and whether a log was there or not, just thatch those sticks, put them one way or another, stick them in the ground, put those sticks all together. I'd learned that by looking at the American Chestnut Foundation's suggestions for how to propagate chestnut seeds without having to protect them in wire cages. Here's another seed. And I chose this site because here a recent hemlock had fallen down and taken down a lot of rhododendron around it. And so there was a lot of sunlight here. And this may be a really good opportunity for the Torreya seed to not only germinate, but to be able to really take off growing. Take a look at this picture here. I found this very moving, to plant Torreya taxifolia seed right next to a seedling hemlock. This little seedling hemlock grew on its own. All the hemlocks, mature ones, are dying around here, but it's growing. It's doomed. It will simply not be able to grow. So putting in, you can see this thatched branches in the kind of right foreground corner of the photograph. I put a seed under that spot. Now here in this photo, there was already a thatch work of branches and twigs that had happened because of some dying hemlocks that then took some other trees down with it. And I really didn't have to add a lot of branches there. I'm just hoping, again, there's a lot of sunlight here, that a squirrel won't be able to find it and dig it out from where I put it in. Now, another technique I used to thwart the squirrels was simply, if I found a rock, take a look at picture here. Here's my hiking boot. Here's a rock that I found with moss and lichen on it, and basically just put a seed directly under the center. There's so much seed that the Torreya seedling can grow for quite a while horizontally, trying to find its way up into the air before it runs out of energy. Here's another rock. This is one in the areas where I work. I just gather flat rocks I find in the streamlets, haul them up slope, and then put the seed right beneath it. This is far too heavy for a squirrel to be able to move. This is about, this next picture here is about the smallest river rock that I've used. And in fact, I was a little concerned that a squirrel might be able to move it and get around it. So I ended up putting another rock right against it. Also, in a couple instances, I put two river rocks very close together, each too heavy for a squirrel to move, hoping the seedling could come up right through this crack in the center of the two. But we shall see. Now, I'm the first one that's really trying to do that. Let me show you some pictures of how extravagant people get in terms of trying to make sure that the squirrels will not be able to take the seeds that they're planting and trying to germinate either in soil or in potted soil. Here's an example at Cornell Bryan Native Plant Garden. This is Janet Manning. She just opened up. You can see at the upper left corner here. This is the top. This is the wire screen that she has and places over the top of this soil area. You can see the Torreya taxifolia seedlings coming up right there in the center of the picture. So she's managed to protect them. There's also wire at the bottom to keep the voles from being able to come up from underneath and grab them. This picture here is, I think it's the hand of Ron Dieterman at Atlanta Botanical Garden. Back in 2007, December 2007, I visited the official U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service endangered species propagation site at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. They do an extraordinary job there. They put 4 seeds to a single pot, then they put all the pots together in a contraption like this, and then you can see here's the wire over the top. This is how they germinate them. Our experience has been, there's a few people who've actually have them germinate the first spring after the seeds have been harvested, but for most of us, it takes a good year and a half, sometimes as long as 4 years, to germinate any of these seeds. Here's Jack Johnston's system at his home in Clayton, Georgia. He's an amazing native plant specialist of the southern Appalachians. Again, as a volunteer, it's all avocational. And you can see where the Torreya seedlings are coming right through the wire now. And so it's about time for him to transfer these into actual pots and then eventually get them out into the forest or into a sunnier orchard type condition for growing. Here's a picture of Jack planting back in 2008 with the rest of us. One of the potted seedlings, and we planted this at Connie O'Brien Native Garden. This one was called Henry David Thoreau. And in fact, let me show you a picture. This was 2008. Let me show you a picture of what Henry David Thoreau looked like as of spring 2013. All right, here's a picture of Henry David Thoreau, and that's actually, that's me standing behind it. Gets a lot of sun, and so this has been our most successful of our 2008 planting of a total of 31 potted seedlings in Waynesville and Junaluska, North Carolina. That effort was actually covered in Audubon Magazine. There was an Audubon writer and a photographer with us during those plantings, and you'll see it's a picture of Jack Johnston, who is shown there with it. Jack was absolutely crucial in helping this effort move forth. Okay, the last thing I want to mention here that was also fun about these last 2 weeks, and in fact this was just 2 days ago, when Michael Dowd and I were just finishing up our speaking engagements in North Carolina. I was able to actually recruit a couple new landowners there for having new people plant Torreya seeds in North Carolina. One in the Greensboro area and another one in Cullowhee. Really excited about both of those because they're north-facing slopes, and we haven't had that microhabitat, north-facing slope. But I've got a picture here of how Torreya Guardians do genetic exchange. This is a picture of Jeff Morris and me. My husband, Michael Dowd, took this picture. We rendezvoused in a Lowe's parking lot west of Greensboro on Interstate I-40. Jeff Morris lives in Spencer, and so we discovered that we could do a genetic exchange of my giving Jeff some of the Clinton, North Carolina seeds and A.J. Bullard seeds from Mount Olive that I had just received. And he in turn gave me several seedlings of his drawn from his plants and some seeds as well. And so we're able to get some genetic exchange going on there. You can see the trunk of his car take a look at this. This is the glass of the seeds that Jeff Morris himself has been harvesting from his own trees, drawn from cuttings. And cuttings actually produce seeds earlier, because if you cut them from mature trees, lateral branches, they still think they're a mature tree lateral branch. And so after they root, very soon they'll start producing seeds again. And that's what Jeff Morris has been able to do. So I got these from him, so I've got some new ones to be able to mix in with our other North Carolina plantings. Here's the ones from Mount Olive. I actually had some more, but I've already dispersed them to the new people in Greensboro and Cullowhee. And here's the ones from the Clinton plant that I was able to get. So anyway, that's a picture of Jeff Morris and me, and here's a picture that Jeff just sent me the day afterwards. I just got it yesterday. You see the 6 seedlings potted there? Those were the 6 seedlings I dug up at the Clinton, North Carolina tree that Mrs. Kennedy allowed me to do. I traded those to Jeff, and he gave me a bunch of his seeds, and here he's got them protected in pots, and now he'll be able to have more genetic diversity in his orchard. He's becoming a really important seed grower for those of us who then take the seeds and the seedlings and rewild them into the mountains of North Carolina, into wild forests. So one last thing I want to do here, and these seeds are really precious, but I want to record this so other people don't have to do what I'm doing now. I'm actually going to kill 3 seeds. I want to see if there's a distinction between what the embryo looks like if you harvest a seed, as Jeff did, unripe, the first week in October. For example, let's do this seed right here. This is from Jeff's in Spencer, North Carolina. We'll take this seed. So this was harvested green. Obviously, he's kept it in the refrigerator. It's still green. And let's compare it to a seed. Let's take a seed from one of the things here from Clinton. This looks like about the same size. Okay, this one is purple-orange. Still looks very nice. We'll take this. This will be our Clinton seed. And then let's finally take from the Mount Olive group here. Let me grab a seed here. Okay. Oops. Okay, so we got, let me keep it straight here. That's Spencer. This is Clinton in the middle. Oh, okay, look at these here. This is Clinton. And this is from A.J. Bullard's tree in Mount Olive. Okay, they're all about the same size. I'm going to take a break now, and I'm going to use a serrated knife and cut through this, and right through the center, and we're going to take a look and see if we can see that embryo. All right, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Wow, that was an experience. First, let me show you a picture of the only other time where I've had a chance to cut into a Torreya seed. And it was in California during the summer. I was visiting the area north of Santa Cruz, and the trees were just prolific. Take a look at how much Torreya californica fruit, or cones, female cones, hanging down here. This was summer, so they weren't ripe at all. They weren't falling yet. So I pulled one off the tree and used a knife and cut through it. It was very easy to cut through. So I started off this time with one of the green, again, this is one of the ones that Jeff Morris gave me, harvested green, the first week in October, all right, from his trees, obviously green. So the first one I cut through just using this serrated knife was very easy, no problem at all. Here I'll also take some pictures of it, but let me see how close I can get. Ooh, yeah, look at that, okay? Now what's interesting here, I don't have much experience with trees, but I do know that the angiosperms, like the oaks, the beech trees and so forth, they have, their embryos are little leaves in there, whereas the conifers, the gymnosperms, actually have miniatures of the whole tree. So I really don't understand this, but I do know it looked a lot like what the California tree looked like. So again, here's a picture of the California seed I cut. And here's a picture of the Florida Torreya, the eastern Torreya. By the way, I've experienced this tree in all stages. Do not call it stinking cedar. This is the common name it was given. The tree deserves a lot more respect than this. If you want to call something stinking, call it ginkgo. Ginkgo does have very smelly seeds. It's a gymnosperm too, but this, it just smells like any old conifer pine tree does. It's the eastern North American Torreya. So take a look at that. So again, I use that knife. The fleshy area hasn't come off. It just cut right through without having to cut off the fleshy area. But when I tried to cut, the next one I tried was one of these. These are the ones harvested purple. Okay, this is from Clinton, North Carolina, all right? I harvested this one purple. So I had one that looked like this. Remember I showed it to you. Wow, did I have a hard time. First of all, first thing that happened is this came just flying off. I had to be careful not to cut my hand for trying to do it. So this is the outer flesh, just came right off. Then it took me, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes of sawing, just sawing and sawing and sawing with a serrated knife to get through the first part of it. And then once I got into the interior, I was able to cut a little bit more. Take a little look at what this looks like. Okay. Very much the same. Now, I don't know what difference it makes to harvest the tree when the outer shell is so vulnerable. It may mean that you really have to keep it from drying out because when you can cut through the green as easy as I was able to, maybe it's susceptible to drying out. That's why we always pack it in sphagnum moss when we're taking it around anywhere and keep it moist in the refrigerator. But this one could probably have survived, drying out quite a bit. So anyway, we've got Jeff Morris will be doing some experimentation, comparing his seed with this Clinton seed and the A.J. Bullard seed, both of which were collected very ripe on October 31st. So basically 1 month later than when the green one was harvested. So again, let me show you the distinction between, here's the green one and the ripe one. Yeah, all right. So I keep thinking of things that I want to mention in here because it seems significant. The other thing that was really wonderful about this trip is that I ran into 2 students who are now going to become Torreya Guardians and help plant seeds. And there's something about being able to work with the young people that really makes a difference. One I ran across when my husband was giving a major university-wide speech at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. And so I was lined up to give a guest lecture at a conservation biology class with Professor Archibald McCallum. And he had about 18 students there, and one of the undergraduates came up to me afterwards, because of course I had my Torrey seeds with me, came up to me afterwards and said that she would like to volunteer, that she knows of a place in Highlands, North Carolina, that might accept seed and that she'd like to tend them. So I gave her about 18 that I had with me at the time. And then at, when was it? Just this last week, last Saturday night, I was at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Greensboro, and I was running the book table after Michael was giving his talk, and started talking with a woman who came up to me, and we started talking about the environment and climate change, and she mentioned that her son, Nicholas Kleinard, who's 14 years old in high school, very interested in climate change. That's his major issue. So I started talking with him, and he said that his teacher, earth science teacher, is really into the climate issue, and in fact is part of a group called ACE, which I eventually learned means Alliance for Climate Education. So I gave him 10 seeds from the Clinton plant, mother plant, and I'll be in communication with him. I hope that that whole Alliance for Climate Education can start involving students in the assisted migration in a time of climate change of this most endangered conifer in the world. And then successive generations of students will be out taking data each year, seeing how the plants are doing, trying to ascertain what kind of environment they do best in, seasonal differences and water levels and so forth. And then finally, some generation of high school students that follows Nicholas in the years and decades ahead will be able to harvest the first group of seeds that he and his classmates will be planting. I mean, what a wonderful opportunity that is. So again, just to conclude here, this is a video that's helping to understand the importance of assisted migration in a time of climate change. It's helping to understand the most endangered conifer in the world, Torreya taxifolia, and the help it needs in moving northward with how the climate has already changed. And then from that, not only being able to help this plant, but through spreading the word about what we're already doing with this plant and what foresters are already doing in Minnesota, in Ontario, Canada, and British Columbia, Canada, already planting with climate change in mind. Species that aren't endangered, but that species will have to move north. What does that mean for us in the Anthropocene? What new role will humans take on in helping widespread trees be able to move north, and other plants, and salamanders? You know, all kinds of things await us. But if we can get this understanding out about the amount of effort it's already taking groups like us to engage in this activity for just one species, maybe that in itself will mobilize Americans and people throughout the world to say yes to legislation, to put a price on carbon so that the incentives will start being right to help the renewables, wind and solar and water and tidal power, be able to take over, and that we'll be able to reduce and reduce and reduce our emissions, get out of the fossil fuel era, and keep climate change to no more than 2 degrees centigrade. We'll see if we're able to do that.